Genesis chapter 29 this evening. The chapters that are lay ahead of us here, 29 through 32, display how God kept his promise and continually blessed Jacob abundantly. They also show that God disciplines his people. He's going to discipline Jacob here. So God is in control. I want to start a long section that I'll be reading through here tonight because I want to talk about the meeting he's meeting with Rachel and then the deception of Laban. 29:1. Then Jacob went on his journey and came into the land of the people of the east. And he looked, and behold, a well in the field, and lo, there were 3 flocks of sheep lying by it. For out of the well they watered the flocks, and a great stone was upon the well's mouth. And thither were all the flocks gathered, and they rolled the stone from the well's mouth, and watered the sheep, and put the stone again upon the well's mouth in its place. And Jacob said unto them, My brethren, whence be ye? And they said, Of Haran are we. And he said unto them, Know ye Laban, the son of Nahor? And they said, We know him. And he said unto them, Is he well? And they said, He is well. And behold, Rachel his daughter cometh with the sheep. It's kind of a familiar little story here at the well. For me, it brings back another thought. We'll talk about that in a moment. The passage reflects back a little bit to that experience that Jacob had back at Bethel, the dreaming of the ladder there. He had been fleeing his brother Esau. He's running, to get away from that anger. But now after that night that he spent with that rock as his pillow, and he saw that great vision, he's looking for a bride now. He was been running, but now he's looking for something else. You see, there's a change in his purpose. And that's due to what God showed him there at Bethel, a promise. It's going to make him a great nation. He said, Jacob, if you can count the dust of the earth, the stars of the sky, all that, that's how your descendants will be. And so his mind naturally says, well, I need a wife. God is leading me to a wife. And God also said, all the families of earth are going to be blessed through you. He has received the Abrahamic covenant once again. So the quest was now the fulfillment of the part of that promise, namely the seed. But Jacob sees outside the land. He's been told he's going to have the land. It's going to be his children are going to have that land. But he's not in the land now. But he's still working toward that promise. And here, of course, is the seed. Now, it's kind of significant that Jacob's meeting of Rachel kind of parallels the meeting of Rebekah back in chapter 24. You remember how that happened? It's such a parallel here to me. I could just see God's hand working. Certainly Laban, Rebekah's brother, would have been remembered how God led Eleazar there. Yet this narrative, unlike back in chapter 24, does not emphasize divine leadership as strongly as it did back there. But it is very strongly implied. It's very much like looking at the book of Esther. In Esther, God is never mentioned. Prayer is never mentioned. But you see it in the book. You see God's hand working. It's implied strongly. And I think you see it here. You see that God's leading is there, even though it's not specified as such here. So here was a man in Jacob who had a marvelous vision. He knew God's plan was to bless him. So Jacob went on his journey, it says. Literally this means picked up his feet, which is a good way of putting it, because if you're going to go on a journey, you have to take that first step. You have to pick up your feet to begin. If you stand still, you're not going to get anywhere. So he has to take that first step. He's picked up his feet. Some might say that Jacob happened on this spot where the well was located. He happened to be near Haran, where Laban lived, and Laban's daughter Rachel just happened to be coming to the the well that day with her sheep. Wait a minute. That's a lot of happening, isn't it? A lot of coincidence. But the timing of everything here, you can see the loving hand of a sovereign God at work. Everything is it's like dominoes falling in place. God's got everything there. He comes to a well. Where am I? You're in Haran. You know Laban? Yeah, he's well. Matter of fact, here comes his daughter. You can't tell me that God didn't orchestrate this event. And it's also, I think it's important that we realize the fact that this meeting took place at a well. It's significant because a well often is associated with God's blessing. How many times have and it tells us they digged a well in Scripture? It's a blessing. You need water to live. And Jesus, sitting at a well, was going to give the woman what? Living water. So it's important. This well, it's a blessing of God. Not only is he watering the sheep and the people there, but he's leading his patriarch to where he wants him to be. And in verse 7 and following it says, "And he said, Lo, it is yet high day, neither is it time that the cattle should be gathered together. Water ye the sheep, and go and feed them. And they said, We cannot until the flocks be gathered together, until they roll the stone from the well's mouth. Then we water the sheep. And while he yet spoke with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she kept them. And it came to pass, when Jacob saw Rachel the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, that Jacob went near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth, and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. And Jacob kissed Rachel, and lifted up his voice and wept. And Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's brother, and he was Rebekah's son, and she ran and told her father. And it came to pass, when Laban heard the tidings of Jacob, his sister's son, that he ran to meet him, and embraced him, and kissed him, and brought him to his house. And he told Laban all these things. And Laban said to him, Surely thou art my bone and my flesh. And he abode with him the space of a month. Here again is a family reunion that's taking place from a family that had never met before. When Jacob watered Laban's flocks, there in verse 10, there's kind of an anticipation of something that's going to happen later in chapters 30 and 31, show how Laban and his flocks would prosper under Jacob. Jacob is going to really enrich Laban over the years. Now, we see something here. In contrast with Laban's lazy shepherds, and they were pretty lazy. Well, it's the middle of the day. It kind of get the feeling they're saying, it's too hot for us to move that big stone off the well. We're just going to wait a while. Jacob was generous. He was zealous. He was industrious. You notice that? He had a mission. He had a quest. And that burning goal implanted by the previous experience drove him to succeed. He was going to do something here. He's going to move that stone and water the sheep. Now, you see that he kissed Rachel. Okay. Don't think too much about Jacob kissing her here. He's not making advances. He's not, doing anything like that. Kissing of relatives was considered a proper greeting. Every now and then we joke about at Christmas. Several years back, Donnie wanted to hang some mistletoe over the door there so he could have a holy kiss when you came in. Nothing wrong with that. This was just a greeting of family members. In calling Jacob his own flesh and blood, he said, Surely thou art my bone and my flesh. Laban appears to be doing something here. Like he is adopting Jacob, his nephew, as a son. He's going to take care of him. At any rate, we see that God led Jacob to a family situation. This is important because he had left a family situation. He had left his mother and father and brother because of the deception, because of the anger. Now the Lord has brought him to a family again. His extended family, but now, Laban says, You're part of the family. So he's back with somebody again. He's not alone. He was never alone. The Lord was always with him, but physically he's not alone now. And Laban said to Jacob, because thou art my brother, shouldest thou therefore serve me for naught? Tell me, what shall thy wages be? And Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the elder was Leah. The name of the younger was Rachel. Leah was tender-eyed, but Rachel was beautiful and well-favored. And Jacob loved Rachel and said, I will serve thee 7 years for Rachel, thy youngest daughter. And Laban said, it is better that I give her to thee than that I should give her to another man to abide with me. And Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed unto him but a few days for the love he had for her. And Jacob said unto Laban, give me my wife, for my days are fulfilled, that I may go in unto her. And Laban gathered together all the men of the place and made a feast. And it came to pass in the evening that he took Leah his daughter and brought her to him, and he went in unto her. And Laban gave unto his daughter Leah Zilpah, his maid, for a handmaid. And it came to pass in the morning, behold, it was Leah. And he said unto Laban, what is this thou hast done unto me? Did not I serve thee for Rachel? Wherefore then hast thou beguiled me? And Laban said, it must not be so done in our country, to give the younger before the firstborn. Fulfill her week, and we will give thee this also for the service which thou hast served with me yet another 7 years. And Jacob did so and fulfilled her week, and he gave him Rachel his daughter to wife also. And Laban gave Rachel his daughter Bilhah, his handmaid, to be her maid. And he went in also unto Rachel, and he loved also Rachel more than Leah, and served with him yet 7 other years. It's a joyful prospect that Jacob had. Evidently it was love at first sight. He saw Rachel, that was it. He was in love with her. And the prospect of marrying Rachel, boy, he was so happy, but it turned into a nightmare because of Laban's deception. In Laban, Jacob met his match. But it's also his means of discipline right here. Jacob had deceived his own brother and father, and now he's deceived by his mother's brother. Oh, what a lesson for Jacob here, isn't it? Oh, boy, I tell you what, God always brings about the right punishment, doesn't he? Here, he's punishing basically Jacob for his deception by deception. In other words, Jacob, you need to learn. You need to trust me. Don't try to deceive. What I say is going to happen is going to happen. Now, you see what happens when people are deceived? According to over in chapter 31, 20 years of drudgery, affliction, and deception lay ahead for Jacob now. Though through Laban, he received his own medicine of deception. What we might say, what goes around, comes around, and it did, full bore on him. But Jacob's tenacity shows that he counted these just as minor setbacks. I wouldn't count it as a minor setback. I actually would, it was major to me. If I worked 7 years and then get the wrong wife, I would be upset. I'd be angry. But God took him, and he is developing his character, and he turned the fruits of deception into blessing and built the promised seed, the nation of Israel. Yep, Jacob was learning a lesson, all right. He's also growing, and he's maturing, and he is learning to trust the Lord day by day by day. Isn't that what Abraham did? Didn't Abraham learn to trust the Lord more every single day? That's what Grandpa did. And he's learning now. He's learning the same thing. Grandson learning the same thing. Trust the Lord more every day. Jacob's plan was to work 7 years for Rachel. Maybe in his mind, 7 years, he'd have Rachel. Maybe his brother had calmed down. He could go home. Things didn't work out that way. Our plans are not always God's plans. And those 7 years, the Bible said, passed quickly because he loved her so much. The time just flew by. Interestingly, each of the three patriarchs married beautiful women. Sarah is said to be beautiful in chapter 12, and Rebecca in chapter 24, and Rachel is said to be beautiful. Now, Leah was tender-eyed. That word, the eyed, means outward appearance, and tender means she was soft, weak, tender-hearted. I think it's a nice way of saying she wasn't as attractive as her sister, but there must have been a resemblance. They must have been enough alike that even in the state that Jacob was in, he didn't pick up the difference. You know, when the time came for the wedding feast, well, I'll tell you what, I guarantee you, Jacob was ready. He was merry and he was spirited. But that night, it's Leah that he finds out he's marrying and not Rachel. The older sister was substituted. Why was it so easy to deceive Jacob? Well, I think the answer may be right here, verse 22. And Laban gathered together all the men of the place and made a feast. Now, you can be sure at this feast something was served. I'm not talking about the fatted calf, but I guarantee you there was wine served at that feast. And I have, the Bible doesn't say this. You say we're speculating. Yes, I am speculating. That Laban probably just kept giving Jacob wine, one toast after another. Here's to your wife, here's to the children. And before you know it, I don't think that old Jacob was in complete control of his senses. So it's a masterpiece of shameless treachery here. Unloved Leah is given to a man who's in love with her sister. Now, it's the next morning before he even realizes it. They must have been enough alike that even in his state he couldn't tell. But the next morning when he's more aware, more awake, he's angry. He looks, and this is not Rachel. Now, he is the object of trickery and deception. Now he can begin to understand something. What can he understand? He understands now what it's like to be on the other side. He now understands how Esau might feel being deceived. So Laban doesn't give a big excuse, does he? He just gives a technicality. Oh, how we love technicalities, don't we? We have a local custom here, and it's not right. We don't give the younger sister before the older was married. In other words, Laban just simply deceived Jacob. 7 years in the making, this deception. Evidently, Laban had this in his mind from day one. And the words that Laban spoke about, the younger can't precede the firstborn, it probably pierced him. He probably was really hurting here. In his early days, the younger, he was the younger of the two, and he had deceptively pretended before his father and his brother. He deceived his brother and his father. Now, if the social conversation were to be set aside, it should be by God and not by deception. All Jacob needed to do was trust the Lord. He and his mom, God said this is going to be, it's going to be. But it didn't work, Man is a sinner. Man is selfish. Man wants things his way. We need to put it God's way. So I think those stinging words that Laban spoke, there was no comment after that. The event was basically, to me, simply God's decree against Jacob. Nothing more needs to be said. I think at this point, Jacob understands. He's beginning to see deception. And I think he sees God's hand in this too. The Bible demonstrates a principle over and over again. What a man sows, he reaps. And that's absolutely true, and we see it right now. Some have called this irony, some have called it poetic justice, but it's more than that. It's more than just those things. It is divine retribution in which there is often measure for measure in the turn of events or the turn of affairs. God orders the affairs of people to be set right. God is in control. God is righteous. He does things for our own good and for our own spiritual growth. We may not see it, we may not appreciate it, but that's what he does. We're going to see this young fella, he's going to become a man. He is going to be growing up right before our eyes. He was still a boy. I mean, I don't know how, it doesn't make any difference how old he is. You know, some fellas become a man at 18, and some at 48 are still not a man. He is growing into a man before our eyes. So with Jacob, this deception was perfectly fitted. It was divine punishment to bring his own craftiness before his eyes. God is basically telling Jacob, you take a good long look. And he is now. You know, he had deceptively presented himself to his father under the guise of Esau, his firstborn. Now, Leah, the firstborn, was deceptively introduced to him under the guise of Rachel, her younger sister. He said, sometimes God has a sense of humor, doesn't he? How he works things out. So fitting. The younger brother deceiving using the older brother for deception. Now the older sister using the younger sister in deception here. So after the initial reaction, Jacob recognizes the deception. He understands what it was, and he said, okay, well, I have nothing I can do. He finished out the bridal week. That was the request. And at the end of which he was given Rachel. Now he has 2 wives in 7 days. This is the beginning of a major problem. He said, I remember in Gospel Light, I was talking about this years and years ago. And I said, I feel for Jacob because he's got 4 wives in the same household. And I forget who it was that said, I don't feel sorry for it. I do. You've got 4 women and children of 4 different women, and that's what's going to cause all the problems as you go down the line here. This deception is just continually growing. It's a major family problem. Each daughter was given a servant girl as a wedding gift. That's a custom of that society. So now you have Leah and Zilpah, and you have Rachel and Bilhah, and you've got 4 women that are going to end up, and there's going to be rivalry, and there's going to be anger. As we unfold this story, you see it. And Jacob worked another 7 years, which he owed Laban in return for Rachel. 14 years for the woman he loved. This also tells us something else about the growing up of Jacob. Now that he has Rachel, he could have just packed his bags and took off in the middle of the night, couldn't he? But he kept his word. We see him growing up here. Jacob was not the only believer who needed a Laban to discipline him. Unfortunately, many people do. We need sometimes that discipline that God gives us. So now we're going to look at the tribal ancestors a little bit. And that there's a contest, there's a rivalry that we see right away. And it's a story it's a craving by human beings for love and recognition, and the price for thwarting God's plan and for trying just being yourself, being wicked, self-centered, being a sinner. Listen from verse 31 following. And when the Lord saw Leah was hated, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. And Leah conceived and bare a son, and she called his name Reuben. For she said, surely the Lord hath looked upon my affliction. Now therefore my husband will love me. And she conceived again and bare a son, and said, because the Lord hath heard that I was hated, he hath therefore given me this son also. And she called his name Simeon. And she conceived again and bare a son, and said, now this time will my husband be joined unto me, because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore was his name called Levi. And she conceived again and bare a son. And she said, now will I praise the Lord. Therefore she called the name Judah, and left bearing. So the family relationship here, relationships of Jacob, are sowing some bitter seeds. I think probably the saddest part of this was the Lord saw Leah was hated. There's just 2 now, and the favoritism is there. And we see that the Lord opened her womb and closed Rachel's. Rachel was like Sarah and Rebekah before, she was barren. Jacob was cruel to Leah. It doesn't say that he was cruel to her, but this was the unwanted wife. God, as well as Leah, was aware of this fact. She said, every time she says, now he'll love me, now he'll come to me, now he'll do. I'll tell you that even though he didn't love her, we see that Jacob went into her evidently pretty often. He's using her even if he doesn't love her. So Leah's first 4 sons were born in pretty rapid succession. And this must have been contrasted with the long waits of the earlier fathers. So Abraham had to wait, and Isaac had to wait. And now this comes pretty bang, bang, bang. He's got 4 sons quickly. But the story of these births, I think, is rather sad. But in them, as the chapter as a whole, God is recognized as the one who gives life instead of human effort. Did you notice in verse 31, this is God here. He opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. God said, no, Rachel, you're loved, but you're not going to get children right now. Leah, he hates you. He doesn't love you that way, but you're going to have children. Who's in control? God's in control. Leah named her firstborn Reuben, literally see ye a son, indicating that the Lord had seen her misery. It's another wordplay that joins in here. Now at last my husband will become attached to me. Attached means affection, to have affection for me. She is hoping these children will bring Jacob's love. A naming showed her hope, but also her consolation and also her faith. Jacob never saw her affliction. It's like he's blind, but God did. Remember over at the well of the living one, back in chapter 16, Birleha Roa. Then Simeon, meaning hearing, was so named because the Lord heard that Leah was not loved. Some people get the wrong impression when they say the Lord heard, like he got a Western Union telegram. He knew all about it. It's like when you talk about before the flood and God's searching for a righteous man. He knew it was only Noah. Sometimes people think wrongly about God. God knows all things. God heard, basically, is what her testimony and faith of his providence. Remember, Ishmael meant God hears. Simeon means basically God heard or hearing. Levi means attached. He was named this way for her hope that her husband would become attached to her, but it wasn't to be. And in Judah, celebrated, was her consolation. So she would be satisfied to praise the Lord, for Judah meant, let him be praised. And of her 4 sons, of course, we've read later on in the book, we know who's the son who will get the blessing and carry on the line is Judah. So Leah exhibited pretty genuine faith during a time of great affliction there. And I'm not going to start 31 this week. We'll pick that up next week. I'm so a whole chapter tonight. For me, that's moving.
30.